Abby Hall, it is a pleasure to have you back on the Singletrack podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Finn. I'm doing well. Always happy to have a chat with you. I love your show so much.
Oh, means a lot. And yeah, I think maybe the place to start, because I think this is part UTMB pre-race thing, but also like a summary or like a look back at the last 15 months. I think it might be helpful to summarize the last like year and a half here for the rest of the conversation to kind of make sense. By all accounts, you had your best season in 2022, right? Like podiums at Trans
Yeah.
Gran Canaria, CCC, Transvolcania. You fast forward to, I think it was June of last year, freak accident, nonchalant training run, simple wrong step, broken leg. You were on track for UTMB that year. And like all of a sudden, at least initially, your future as a pro trail runner is uncertain. At least it's a really long road to like get back to normal. Um, I'm not sure if it's beneficial to even think about this question, but do you ever wonder at times how your season would have played out or like what path you would have kept going down if none of this had happened?
Of course. Yeah, I think I was on a real tailwind there, and I really think that it took me so long to get to that point too, that like there was this kind of looming fear in the back of my mind of like, am I starting over again? Like that took so long to get there. Like, am I just repeating that and continuing this long road to get back to what I know I'm capable of? And I think, I like to think that I'm not fully starting over. There's so much experience there to draw from not only that great season, but the
Yeah.
not so great seasons that led to that. That's like where most of that learning took place. So I think most of my daydreams about like what could have happened petered off by like the after like UTMB of last year, because I think that had been my last like race on the immediate timeline. But otherwise, I think, I've one thing I've tried to remember is that like this sport is challenging, injury or no injury. Like a good UTMB is never guaranteed, regardless of what if you've had the best season of your life before that or not. It's like it's never guaranteed. And so it's definitely snapped me back into this mode of scrappy, not taking anything for granted, earning it every time, and just focused on like my next best move in front of me.
When you think about the initial uncertainty of it, like right in that moment, June 23, I'd
Mhm.
love to hear some of your thought process there because I know at least with some doctors, not all of them, in fact, maybe not even the majority of them, for some doctors, it can be sort of like this doomsday thing, or they have their own versions of like what a realistic outcome for you looks like. Maybe they set the bar low, like they don't always support your determination. In your case, what were the doctors saying? Like what was their initial vision for, what 2.0 Abby could be?
Once I got to my ultimate surgeon and fantastic doctor, things started to become a lot more clear. But without getting too much into the details, it was like a bit of a hopscotch from some providers that were missing things in my diagnosis, which led to a really bad blood clot, which pushed back surgery. And so it was this kind of like bad domino pattern for a while of dealing with the missed thing from the doctor before. But then once I got to, and I'm not like, blaming those doctors too much for that. I think a lot of it
Yeah.
was kind of like people taking a look at the scan and going like, broken leg, I've seen this movie before, like rest up. And it's like, ended up being a lot more complex than that with different, ligament and tendon and cartilage and things like that. So I ultimately found a fantastic surgeon at the Stedman Clinic in Vale, Dr. Preventure. And I think what was awesome about working with him is he like, like the jerseys and photos on his walls speak for themselves. And I was really happy to be in an atmosphere where like where just sport in general was normalized. Like the first question he asked me was like, when do you need to be competing again? And I was like, oh, is that like up for like input? Like, I mean, I think the point being like, he's used to working with athletes on tight timelines to be like, are we going for an Olympic timeline? Is the
Yeah.
NFL season starting soon? Like, what are we working with and what do we Like, what are the time constraints? And so like that level of like intimacy with like sport, I think helped normalize it so that he wasn't the kind of doctor throwing out things like, you'll never run again, or you'll never compete at the same level. I think I said something like, when will I be back to normal? And he brings up the big existential question of, well, what is normal? Like, were you normal 6 months ago? Like, were you normal, like, you know, a month that, like, what's normal to you? Like, and I think that is an interesting question I've thought back on as, you know, a runner. Like, we're always kind of like juggling little tightness and niggles, and like, it's easy once you become like deeply injured to view it in this binary state of like, I'm either injured or I'm not. But the reality is like, even when you're healthy, you're like juggling staying healthy and staying on top of it. So he was an early source of positivity in the diagnosis, but he also is like he's like a military background kind of guy. So he's like a straight shooter. He's like, this, like, it doesn't look great at the moment. Like, we've got a lot of work to do, but I'm confident about the work I can do. And you've got a road ahead of you, but like, we're going to do this. So it was a really good blend of optimism and, and like the work we had cut out for us.
It's pretty cool that, at least to some extent, there's a little bit of a choose your own timeline there in terms of like how hard you want to invest in the process, and like sort of experimenting with what's possible. This is a totally different sport reference, but I'm a big sports fan in general, basketball, football, etc. And last year on the NFL scene, it was fun to see. Well, it wasn't fun, but Aaron Rodgers, superstar quarterback, tears his Achilles like the first preseason game or the first regular season game. And historically, that's like a 9-12 month injury. And it was kind of cool to see him flirt with the idea of like, can I actually come back like 6 weeks into the regular season? Are we going to do like this totally experimental surgery in Germany or whatever, and like lock my tendon back in a certain way? So it's just cool that we're in that era where there's like optimism attached with any circumstance.
Totally. And like, I have the advantage of this being my job. And so recovery really became my full-time job. And I think that with that comes like the benefit of being able to be like resting and recovering at a different timeline than if other stressors were introduced. And I do think that stuff was able to make a difference in my ultimate recovery.
I was going to say, like, when you are a pro trail runner, similar to training for races, I would imagine that you also, like you just said, you get the chance to kind of pour yourself into the recovery, the finer details at like a whole different level, and maybe like rehab camps that take the place of training camps, right? Was that the case for you? Like, were you doing anything exotic in that process?
Yeah, totally. I actually went to Austria for a month after I had kind of recovered from the immediate phase of recovery post surgery. So for the timeline reviewing, June was the accident, July was the surgery, and then September I went to Austria, and that was like right when I was transitioning off of, I like went there on crutches, came home not on them, not necessarily by virtue of the awesomeness of this rehab place, but that's where I was in my timeline. And it was a really fantastic facility. Like, first day, met with a doctor there. We came up with this true, like, it was true like 9 to 5 days of sessions, everything ranging from lymph massage to like underwater therapy with what's the gas you get removed from your basement?
Oh my gosh. I almost wrongly said asbestos. It's not
Yeah,
asbestos.
no, radon water, like,
Radon.
like
Okay.
all these kind of different treatments, but then, you know, of course, mixed in with things like really extensive physical therapy, strength sessions, different check-ins with doctors, biomechanics of like, as I relearned to walk again, like gait analysis. And they had fantastic facilities, and it was just like also a really great atmosphere to do it in. It's where we have Adidas puts on a big race there every year. So it's a place that I already know and love in Bad Gastein, Austria. And so it was, quite literally like I had my folder, like my schedule, like a kid at school, where I was like, okay, like, you know, next hour I go here, and I'm going from room to room and working with a lot of different practitioners, and got introduced to a lot of different styles of kind of managing this process. Everyone from people very bluntly saying 2 years before you're normal again, to, you know, like this woman who's like literally slapping me on the back of my head every time my foot would track the wrong way. Like it was like a really wide range of kind of methods and approaches, but I was just like a sponge for all of it. Cause I was just like, I was kind of like tracking in like the average of it all, where it's like, you know, some opinions were super aggressive, maybe some were super conservative. And I was just kind of, you know, taking it all in. And it was ultimately a really fantastic experience though. And I think also was a really important part of just returning to normal life after a lot of like a long blur of weeks just on the couch and like doing my very, very rudimentary PT. It felt really good to just like have a rhythm again, and like even just basics of like developing independence, like crutching to a session by myself and not having like Cordis or my mom or dad like driving me around, like helping me with everything. I mean, I know that sounds so basic, but I think anyone who's been through like a major injury like this knows like you become like you have no choice but to be completely dependent on your support system. And so cultivating that independence and that feeling of like athlete life again was like just breathed life back into me.
I think one of the stereotypes I had from sort of like the post-traumatic injury experience is that it's almost like solitary confinement. There's just a lot of isolation involved. But at least for parts of it, it sounds like you were pretty regimented, like you were pretty busy. It was a full-time job.
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. Yeah, like, and I think I was really just kind of in this space of just constantly focused on my next best move, whether that was like hour to hour or, you know, month to month. And yeah, I think, you know, had a lot of like great resources to be able to approach recovery in the way that I did, with the support of Adidas, and, you know, being able to do it the right way is like a real privilege that I had. So that does not go unnoticed for sure.
Now that you've been through this process, how much stock do you put in having like a good attitude and a positive outlook in terms of like consolidating that recovery timeline? Like how many like months or days can you chop off the back end of a timetable just because like your attitude is there?
That's a really great question. I mean, I don't know if it's totally quantifiable, but I think it's like the matter of like how the path forward looks moving forward. Like a kind of line I repeated to myself a lot was, only you get to decide what kind of power this has over you. Like you could let this haunt you for years and years, and like, or you could like let it become the fire that moves you forward, and let it be like the golden thread that keeps you like attached to what you love. And of course, it depends what day you ask me that question. There's the more cynical and hard days in there where I'm like, you know, this is all just like doesn't matter how hard I work, like I'm just doomed. Or there's the days where I'm like just focused on like getting back to work.
Yeah.
So there's like, yeah, like I won't glaze over it. There's been very, very hard times there. Should probably, anyone who's gone through this would know that goes without saying, but it's been like incredibly challenging despite I mean, like it's easy to look back now and be like, I'm running now, it went well, so therefore like it must have been like a smooth path. But like there were plenty of times in there where I really was uncertain of my path forward and back to sport. I mean, it wasn't like a guarantee by any means.
Yeah, one of the reasons I bring it up, and I think you wrote about it, you said it perfectly in an Instagram post. I think you said something like, right now I am more concerned about monitoring the emotional aspects of this fallout as opposed to the physical costs.
100%. Yeah, that's been a big emphasis actually, like even in some of these more recent months of like returning to competing and managing like the ups and downs of like returning to pursuing this at a high level. I've felt at times almost like a seismograph. Like, you know, if you zoom in super close, there's like tiny earthquakes happening all the time. Like if you're super zoomed in, you see like these micro ups and downs. But if you zoom out, it's like, no, there's no earthquake. But I think as I return to trying to like really, you know, be it like UTMB, like it's been easy to be so zoomed in and be like, am I there? Am I not? Did this run go perfectly? Did it not? And so, yeah, it's like definitely forced me to take a bigger picture approach with it, and one that's been like trying to mitigate the emotional cost of monitoring that seismograph. And yeah, I do believe that like the emotional impact of these things can be just as painful as the physical impact. And that's not to dismiss it or say that it's not real. Like I really struggled through all this from a mental health perspective, and that's been a very real thing that I've had to work through. But I do think that yeah, like it's something, it's another variable to be managing alongside all this.
I want to come back to sort of like the sports psych side of this in a second, but it reminded me with sort of that opportunity to go work over in Germany at that training rehab center. I have a friend here in Salt Lake. I won't name their name, but they did just suffer, great runner, just suffered sort of a tough injury. They're going to be shelved for a while. And I went to go visit them in the hospital. And one of my sort of like points to kind of boost them up was, I think you could go into this rehab process, and while you're healing this injury, I bet there's a chance to work on other like muscle imbalances and instabilities. And maybe you come back not just as a healed runner with your injury, but like there's other things that you contribute that you pick up in the rehab process that you couldn't have imagined. Was that the case for you? Like, do you feel like you're coming back stronger, not just because you fixed the broken leg, but like you worked on your biomechanics or something like that?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I think maybe not so much on a physical level the way you're describing it, because I do feel like I very much had to kind of start at the ground up with like some of the relearning to walk and getting that right again, and like some things changing with my gait and just like the very full body impact of that. But I would definitely say from like a psychological perspective and a mental perspective, like removing the experiential part of our sport, removing the like literal mountaintop experiences, hours in the forest every day, fresh air, like rain on your skin, whatever it is, like removing that and going into this very clinical PT gym environment where it's like, all right, I can do 90 minutes of spinning one leg on a bike with no resistance. And I'm, just in front of a white wall. It's not like anything glamorous. That definitely, I mean, if there was ever a point in the road where someone was looking to give up, those would be the moments where I think a lot of people would be like, yeah, like I'm out. Like, I think I'll just kind of like return to like whatever I can. But it definitely revealed within myself that I was ready to double down on this. It wasn't something that I was losing care for in any way. If anything, it was becoming even more important to me in light of this experience. And so I think the psychological impact of simply getting through it is massive. And I have a far greater empathy for any athletes that I know that have gone through this type of experience. I think before, I really didn't have any experience with injury at all. The last running injury I'd had was when I was 14 years old and just started like a training log for the first time. So like I had no experience with this. And I think I've really underestimated what a massive undertaking it is. So yeah, like I'm sorry to hear about your friend, but I do think that there will be many things that they come out of with this for the better. I mean, not like in a this makes you better way, but
Sure.
I don't know. It sounds cheesy, but like I think there's parts of that that's true. Yeah, you know what I mean.
It's amazing how much of the cheesiness and the cliche just rings so true and comes right to the surface in all of these things. It's like when you're, suffering in the middle of a race and all you care about is food and sleep and being in like a warm home or something. Like there's a place for it for sure. You're such another thing, and I definitely read this somewhere. Again, it could have been on your Instagram. You're such a tough runner. I don't think you've like ever DNF'd before, and that's a whole other topic. But like you're notable for getting through a lot of challenging situations like this one. But I think you have talked about how for a long time, like one of your core philosophical pillars was self-responsibility, and maybe that has changed a bit through this experience. How has it become more complicated through this recovery process?
That's an awesome question. I'm so glad you asked it, because it's like, it gets right to the core of like one of the things that I had to work through in all of this, which was this idea that I could manage, AKA maybe nice code word for control, all of the inputs to a degree that I could completely avoid injury or avoid accidents like this. Or if I only did enough strength and yoga and like agility work and whatever, that I would like somehow dodge this. And it's just not true. Like, especially, I feel like I was begging early on, like begging any of the practitioners I was working with, like, what could like the cause of this have been? Like, can you give me some kind of answer to cling to that I had like dropped the ball on? And they were like, it's just a freak thing. It was just the wrong foot placement at the wrong time on the perfectly wrong rock and patch of dirt. And that took me so long to really accept. And I think I arrived at more of this place of yeah, maybe like, I don't know. I do believe that we can take a large degree of responsibility for the impact these things have on us. So like, I can't control the circumstances, but I can control how I react to them and how I like manage the fallout. So like, there is still managing involved. It's not just like, I don't see it as just like me just taking it or me just purely relying on luck. But I kind of, back to that emotional response thing, see that as being where my responsibility kicks in. But that is an ongoing lesson that gets right to the meat of it.
Right on. Yeah. I think with this next question, I'm like, teamwork is top of mind, especially in this whole process. I know you've had a chance to work with a sports psychologist through the majority of this process. In terms of value, where does this type of person sit in your hierarchy of needs as an athlete? Like, is it fundamental? Is it nice to have? Is this person right alongside Jason Koop as like a really important confidant and like vision setter? Like, how do you think of this person?
Great question. I mean, I think these relationships always take a long time to develop. And I'm like a big believer in like choosing the people you want to be a part of your team and like building that relationship over the course of many years. Like, I think I've worked with Coop for like since 2017. How many years is that? Like a lot of years.
7
Yeah.
8. Yeah.
7 or 8 years. Yeah. So like, I really believe in like building those relationships over a long period of time. And so like, relative to say like my relationship with Coop, like, you know, a year with my sports psych feels like a relatively new relationship to the people I'm working with, but it's become super critical. I think especially in the sense that like I can have I don't know, tool sets to refer, like, I mean, basically tool sets that I can use during races. That's been really helpful, and to kind of normalize parts of the experience that seem really like isolating to be going through, and to like have my sports psychologist go, oh no, like that's like this part of your brain kicking in. And the reason you have this response is because of this. And like, it's really comforting to have like that, that degree of involvement in from a practitioner in my journey. So yeah, it's been critical, I would say, to getting through this year. But I wouldn't like, I don't know if I could like rank these in any sort of order. I would say my relationship with Coop is the most important of the people that I work with, just because like yeah, of the length that we've worked together. And like, he was also probably like, you know, influencing me in a like confidence building way, you know, for a while before I was working with anyone specifically for some of these skill sets. So even though that's not like his specialty or anything. So yeah, it's critical though. I think if it is something that athletes struggle with or think on, like, I highly recommend it. And I think that it's, yeah, not to be underestimated as a tool.
We've talked a little bit about this with your teammate, Tom Evans. I know he's worked or is working with a sports psychologist currently. And I'm sure it's different for every athlete, but for people in the audience, viewers, listeners that are curious about what might be involved, what the typical prompts are, what a session looks like.
Yeah.
what do you talk with your sports psychologist about? Is it just like the event at hand? Is it sort of like your why for the entire existence in the sport? How does that all work?
I actually just got out of a session right before hopping into this meeting
Amazing.
with you. So I like literally have my notebook open with me with notes next to me that I was just taking in our session. So for me, it's been a lot of it has been managing the return to sport. So like my first sessions with the sports psych, for context, started like right after surgery. And so initially it was like, kind of managing the sadness and like some of the depression that was just coming alongside of being like bedridden and like removed from the thing I loved. And then, kind of transitioning back into sport, we were focused a lot on moving past the injury. So for me, like one of the things that we did, I think the way this works, like I'm allowed to share, like the practitioner I work with couldn't share this, but like I think I can freely share what we discuss in our sessions. Just as a kind of a question mark, but I think I can. One of the things that we did, which I thought was really cool, was I did like a letting go ceremony at the place where I like took that step and that had my injury. So that was a really meaningful thing that I did. And I really appreciated like how he helped me put together this little ceremony that I went out there and had.
Wow.
And so it's been really cool because I can't speak for like how the psychologist I work with works with other athletes, but I've really appreciated how he has kind of adapted to like the way that I move through the world and the way I process things and kind of quickly caught on to those. Like, I don't know, say if it was my husband Cordis going through this, like, I don't know if like a letting go ceremony is something that would like resonate with him. But like for me, that speaks to me. And I was like really impressed with like even the idea that he had to suggest that. So that's like a cool thing that we worked on in the fall. And then a lot of it has been focused towards UTMB and some of the obstacles that I faced along the way, returning to like a high level training and like getting ready to compete again. So it's freely structured. Like there's not like any sort of program or anything like that we like are following or working through, but it's really self-guided. So like our session last week, for example, was super tactical and meticulous. And like our session tonight was more about like narratives I'm telling myself and like different approaches to that. So it's been fascinating. It really works with my brain and I get a lot of enjoyment out of it.
I think some of the people that I'm the most impressed with in the world are people like your sports psychologist who have this talent to kind of meet people where they are. And I'm sure they work with, it could be 8 or 10 athletes and everyone is an individual. And for this person to say, after listening to you say like, I think we should go do this ceremony or to, brainstorm that with you, that's incredible.
I know I've been really impressed. So yeah, it's amazing that there's people that are fully supporting athletes in this way. It's like critical. So it's been huge.
Switching topics a little bit, I feel like we have a lot to talk about because you've been so generous on social media, just sharing, documenting this entire journey. And as I was sort of scrolling through some of your posts over the past year, one sort of question that came to mind for me was like how you were trying to frame this sort of comeback process and what you were trying to communicate to the audience. Is there a type of person, like do you sort of pick a persona, like someone that you want to speak to? Like, are you speaking to the crowd of people that have, been through an injury or fellow elite athletes that are, in similar trenches with you? Like, how do you come up with ideas here?
I woke up the day after my injury and opened my phone as we all do. And I remember just being desperate for any content or stories I could find on anyone who had come back from anything similar. And I could find it in basketball. I could find it in football. I could find it in track and field. I wasn't finding a lot of it in our sport. And I was trying to figure out why this is. And I think it is maybe because there's like less often are there like trauma accidents in our sport. I mean, they certainly exist. And I was just like became really hungry to consume stories like this. And so I even started like a whole, bookmark on like my computer for just like any vlogs I could find, any Instagram accounts I could find. And like I really, especially because I like wasn't doing much during this time too, like became like really engaged with following along with anyone I could find. Like a good example is steeplechaser Val Constein. She had
Yes.
a bilateral ACL surgery. Same surgeon as me, Dr. Preventure.
Yeah.
She had her surgery like a month before mine. She put a great vlog together. She just competed at the Olympics. And she's an example of someone whose journey I loved following. And I mean, I just feel like that type of content was at times there were days when that kind of stuff was the only thing pulling me forward, of just simply knowing like someone's gotten through this, like they're 6 weeks ahead in their journey or whatever it is, and you can do this too. And so immediately I kind of started to frame this as creating content or showcasing the journey for anyone going through anything similar, because I hope that it made people feel less alone, even if what they were going through maybe wasn't a trauma injury or an injury at all. I definitely feel a degree of responsibility, being that this is my job to share about the highs and lows. I think we don't, like I believe that my job involves winning publicly, failing publicly, dealing with everything in between publicly, and I want to be someone that's open about the full arc of that journey. So I think that if I want people to be involved and invested when I'm on the podium, like I would hope that they're also involved and invested when my Strava activity for the day is like 10 minutes, one of walking and 1 minute on, 1 minute off running. Like, yeah.
There's a lot of wisdom in what you just said. Maybe one of the shallower bits that a marketer like me picks up is create the content that you want to consume.
Totally.
And you did it perfectly.
Yeah. I mean, it's, and I don't think I was really like, I really, my intention was really to like make people feel less alone, but you're right that like from a marketing perspective, that is what works.
That was super shallow on my part. No, everything you said there is brilliant, but I was just like, oh my gosh, I cannot decouple that from my brain.
It is true though. It is true.
You're a great storyteller though. Looking at this year specifically and, the race season in this whole context, I'm curious to understand, like how your mind comes to terms with your identity. Like, where does like current self versus past self come into play? How have you kind of equipped yourself to confront that like comparison game?
I think that one thing early on I realized was that, we always talk so much about not comparing yourself to others, but I think comparing you to you can be equally painful and toxic. And I've felt at times through this, like I can be my own worst enemy, especially when I'm training in places that I've run a lot before. And comes to mind like this winter, we spend a lot of time in Fountain Hills, like near where the Javelina 100 is. And I was out on stuff like in my return to runs, like that I've normally be doing workouts on. And I just open up Strava afterwards and be like, wow, you like a year ago this time, you did this in half the time. And it's really demoralizing, and it can really become like this dead weight that you have to carry around. And so I've had to definitely manage that and make sure that the narrative of you versus you kind of that we talk about is one that stays healthy and positive, and not demoralizing.
I know you had a cool opportunity this spring to sort of test the legs at Zane Grey.
Mm.
And then you've been out in Chamonix the past
Mhm.
couple weeks, scouting the course, etc.
Yeah.
Do you feel, and we're recording this about 10 days pre-race, do you feel like you're at a point where you have satisfactory trust in your body again in like these high performance scenarios?
I do. I think I had a really impactful conversation actually after Black Canyon with Hayden after he won. And Hayden went through a knee surgery of his own last summer. And I asked him something similar to this. I was like, you just like, this was your first race back. Like you just dove right into like Black Canyon, like gonna go get a ticket, like win all this. And he was like, just really confidently said, you know, like I've been a competitor my whole life. I know how to do this. And yeah, like this is what I do. And that's been like definitely on the mental mood board, if you will. Because I do believe that especially with these longer ultras, there is a degree of like knowing how to do it, knowing how to put it together and execute it. That, you know, I think there's a reason that like, you know, these like 100-mile race results are not just like fitness ranked. It's like, it's so much more than that. And so I think I've been trying to remind myself that there's a number of categories I'm trying to nail here aside from fitness. I was able to do a race in Arizona at home in April. That was kind of a like hop in last minute, toe the line kind of thing, rip off the Band-Aid, which I'm really glad I did because then I missed making it to the start line as planned at the Mont Blanc 90K in June. So that was the original plan, was for me to come out here and do that. I was dealing with some IT band issues, which I now have in a good spot. And just immediately once that trip was canceled, it was like, all right, all eyes on UTMB. Like, let's just focus on getting to the start line. So I got out here in mid-July and put some great training together. And I'm feeling a lot of momentum and excitement because this has been a milestone that I've been looking to really since I finished my last CCC in 2022. But I mean, UTMB 2024 was a conversation in the hospital with Cordis when all this went down last year. It was immediately UTMB 2024. And I am someone who's very, very goal-based. And so having a focal point to look to became a huge part of my recovery process and was critical to getting me through the last year. I mean, everything from different, you know, things related to my surgery and like, you know, nurses saying, go to your happy place. Like my happy place is like thinking of like an aid station or like being at the start line or like all those just like fleeting glimpses of memories. Those are what I'm thinking of in the lows or on the one-legged spin bike. And so the role that this goal has played has been massive. And so even just getting here is huge. But I'm also like definitely a believer in like, to quote Alexi Pappas, like you can be proud of yourself and want more out of yourself at the same time. So
Amen.
I do still have big goals, big hunger, big excitement for next week.
The Hayden example is amazing because I was just going to ask you, you know, whether for someone in your circumstance, is it illogical to even consider, you know, either raising the bar for yourself or having expectations from like a prior era? But he kind of proves that like if you know how to do it and you have like even just like the mental memory of the process, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. When you say goal focused, outcome or process, like which one is more important for you?
I guess, I mean, process is definitely more important for me, but like I very much emotionally latch on to the goal of the race itself, not even the outcome, but just like the emotions surrounding the experience of attempting the thing. That's kind of like what I what really fuels me. Like I am a big visualizer. It's something I visualize in training all the time. And I'll visualize like very specific ways I want to feel and behave like when I'm out racing. And so, yeah, like it's an important part of my process. So I guess it like is kind of cyclical in that way.
So like when you are running from Triant maybe back to the finish, that'd be quite a long run. But like in training, if you're doing that type of run, part of the run involves like the visualization aspects. Like, okay, like I'm 80 miles deep. Here's how I'm reacting, walking into an aid station, stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I like using specific rocks and things like that as markers for, where I want to put my poles away and how I want to feel here. And I also am very, especially from like the CCC course, like it makes a little bit more sense in a race like CCC, but like I'm very like split oriented. Like I like doing the route and training so that I can like understand my splits and help break down the effort during the race. With UTMB, it's a little different just because there's like so many factors at play and the time scale is so much greater. But it's been really helpful to like be getting that beta out here as well.
It's crazy to think that you were only removed from the sport from like a performance standpoint for about a year. But even in that time span, it feels like we've lived so many lifetimes as a community. Like when you think about the evolution in training, nutrition, logistics, gear, all that stuff. Has that been part of your mission to kind of keep pace? And like, is there anything that you're introducing into your UTMB this year that like you've just observed, like the high carb movement or, super shoe, stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Like I was all aboard the Spring Energy train. So I'm really like psyched to be getting some like, higher carb intake. So that's going to be a fun, I think like, fun for so many people. I feel like I just keep seeing so many Strava mentions and everything about people being like, wow, that long run felt amazing.
And you performed highly on spring too. So it's like, watch out now. High carb, watch out.
Exactly. No, I think like in general, staying close to the sport was something that was really important to me. I mean, like 2 weeks after my injury in June 2023, I like basically like begged Cordis and my parents and everyone to like kind of give their approval on me making the trip out to Western States so that I could support Tom because he had just been staying with us training and we were really invested in his race and crewing him. And so like I was, in like total mess, to be honest. Like Cordis and my parents were like, this is a bad idea. You should not be making a cross country road trip right now. And I got a lot of disapproval from other, many people, but like I was there and it was important to me to be there and to be close to the sport. And I felt like there was something just like holy about being in that infield. Like we just like set me up in a chair and I was like just marinating in the sport, like being healed by the Placer High School track. So I've definitely tried to stay close to it in all ways. Like I've also been a big believer that like if this sport is, if performing well in the sport is important to me when I'm the one performing well, it still has to be important when even if I'm not like at the center of that. Like, it's not like I don't want to be the person that's like, oh, like UTMB is the center of the world when I'm running it. But if I'm not there, like fingers are over my ears, la, 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 it's not happening. Like I really wanted to follow along and like let that emotion I was feeling fuel the process of whatever it was that I was focused on at that stage in recovery.
You mentioned Tom, and it reminds me. So yeah, like you said, you had the chance he lived with you guys for 1 or 2 months before Western last year. Yeah. What are some of the ways that he has influenced your approach to the sport? Like, what kind of impressed you while he was getting ready for the race last year?
Tom played a really critical role right away. I mean, he quite literally he and Cordis carried me out of the woods and took me to the hospital. And, like Tom was there, like moment zero, with all of this. And so right away, I mean, like get home from the ER, go to sleep, you wake up the next morning, you're sitting like being like, all right, what now? And Tom was already a part of that process. He's like, okay, like you need to find the best surgeon, like, where do you need to go? Like he was influencing that process from that first moment of like doing it to the best of my ability. So I was like having to educate myself on like ice machines and where am I going to get this? And like, who do I talk to? And like, how many opinions do I get? And so I felt really grateful, for his friendship in those early moments, because there were a lot of questions, and he was, having gone through a major knee surgery himself the year and a half prior.
Yeah.
He had a lot of really good input on the process. And I think he's someone who, really is able to, like in my, speaking of sports psychology thing we were just talking about, where like confidence reps, I think Tom is someone who like builds a process that creates like confidence for him. And so I think it's a really good reminder of like, what training is really, really for, not just for our physiology, but like, building these confidence reps so that we can do what we want to do on race day in all areas.
Gosh, Tom is another great example of the successful injury comeback story, isn't he? With like
Hugely.
that major knee surgery, and then has probably a pretty solid day, a day that he wanted at UTMB that year.
Absolutely.
A great case study.
Absolutely.
Maybe a few more questions for you before we go. I guess the first, so at the beginning of the conversation, we talked about like, could you have imagined any scenarios for the remainder of 2023 had you not gotten injured? And I guess I'm wondering now, does anything change for you from like a long-term goal / impact standpoint in the sport as a result of this injury? Like, is it you just pick up where you left off, or do you have this sort of like reevaluation of what's important and what you want to do?
You mean like in terms of like race selection and goal selection, or
Could be anything. Yeah.
like kind of just what changes moving forward?
Yeah.
I think really for me, the emphasis is still going to be on like the same kinds of racing. I think, from a literal perspective, but I think overall, and I alluded to it earlier, like this feeling of doubling down and realizing how much I love all of this was something that really surprised me. Like having conversations with friends during this time of kind of like, oh, is it a time to start doing design work again? Or, like focusing on other things. And the answer was a resounding no for me. The focus was that I wanted to get back to my sport. And that was really the main thing on my mind and the main thing pulling me forward. And, I think the love for the sport has been what's pulled me through this. And so I'm just excited to get back out there and to keep enjoying it. Like it's a real gift to be able to do this for my job and to do what I love. And so I do feel very, very much realizing this won't last forever. And that was something I don't think I quite grasped as well before. It's easy for it to just feel like this endless string of season calendars and momentum, and to really fall out of that rhythm, made me realize this isn't going to last forever, and I want to make the most of it while I can.
I feel like you probably just answered this, but I don't know. Last question, and it's less about UTMB, more generalized. Going back to, I think it was 2021, could have been 2022. We had you on the pod shortly after you went full time on the sport, and I remember you saying something like, your design career, it was more of a shadow career in the sense that you knew all along that trail was the passion, but like there was that period of time where you sort of wanted to downplay how much you cared, how much it mattered. And, it's tough to be vulnerable in that respect, where it's like, this is how much I love our sport. In the 2 to 3 years since, do you feel like you've sort of honored that goal of showing how much you love the sport and kind of living out this dream?
That's a really nice callback, because it's nice to remember that sentiment pretty clearly as you describe it. Yeah, I would say I have been true to that, and I'm really happy that I've stuck with the focus on this through my recovery, because I just wanted to leave no stone unturned in all of this, and to recover to the best of my ability, and to see what I can do moving forward to the best of my ability. And like that, yeah, the impact the sport has on all of our lives of pulling us along to achieve more than we thought imaginable is what drew me in the first place, and continues to be what drives me forward. It's really special.
Abby, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Super stoked to follow the race. Obviously, wishing you the best. I guess before we go, any final thoughts for listeners and viewers?
That's a great question. I mean, I would say to follow your love for why you do something. Like, keep pressing on that. That'll never lead you astray. That's like been the golden thread to keeping me forward through some hard times. So I hope others can find that in their own journeys too.